Our next session is really going to focus on a central issue, which is what is the role of corporations, of American business in solving this crisis. And, you know, we all know that business has been concerned about education for many, many years. If you look at corporate philanthropy, education is always at or near the top of the list in terms of where they spend their money. The problem is that it hasn't led to systemic reform. It really hasn't solved this problem. That's what these leaders are going to address. And our panel is going to be moderated by John Spector. He's the CEO of the Conference Board. Organization has been around for almost 100 years studying what's going on in American business. They're one of the leading reporters on consumer confidence, unemployment, et cetera. Before coming to the Conference Board, John spent over 20 years at McKinsey & Company, worked with a huge array of businesses. He also taught at Wharton. And he's joined this morning by Doug Pruitt, chairman of Sundt Companies and also chairman of Greater Phoenix Leadership, the leading business organization in Arizona. Michael D'Ambrose, senior vice president of HR at Archer Daniels Midland, one of the world's largest agribusiness companies. John Rico, founder, president, and CEO of Rico Computer Enterprises, really an inspiring story. He owns the largest minority-owned tech company in the Midwest, and his own personal story is dramatic. I hope he's going to have time to share it with you. Laila Worrell, managing director of Accenture, who's working on their Skills to Succeed initiative, and Mark Greenlaw, vice president, sustainability and education affairs at Cognizant. Before assuming that job, Mark was the CIO of Cognizant and really did a lot to fuel the enormous growth of that company. He's the guy who's putting his whole career now on the line to try to deal with these issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Spector.
Thanks, Bill, and please join me in welcoming our panelists. What I'm going to do is ask each of them, at the risk of running too long here, ask each of you to spend 20 seconds, as we did on our conference call, and just explain a little bit, kind of connect not just your name and title, but what it is that your company is doing in this realm. From the Conference Board perspective, as Bill said, I'm the CEO, but we study these sorts of trends through the lens of workforce readiness. We published a report a few years ago called "Are They Really Ready to Work?", which looked directly at this issue. Now, I'll turn it over to Doug. Doug, just a quick introduction.
Yes, my name is Doug Pruitt, and I'm chairman of Sundt Construction Company. And obviously, in the construction industry, about 2/3, could be a little bit more, of our employment is skill-based. So my activity at the in terms of education has been in the CTE realm. A strong believer in that. We use a lot of professionals as well, but our industry lacks the skilled trades in this country that we need.
I'm Mike D'Ambrose. I run human resources for Archer Daniels Midland. Most of you today ate something that was a product that we helped produce. But you know, when you look at our company, we bring a little different perspective to this because our facilities are out all over the world in rural locations, and in America in rural locations. And when we look at our employment, and you'll hear a little bit of this, I'm sure. We're struggling to fill our open jobs, and we're really focused on how can we address the kids that don't get out of high school, so that we can fill our openings.
I'm Layla Worrell. I lead Accenture's New York Metro offices, and probably most relevant to this discussion today, as Bill mentioned, I've been involved in our Skills to Succeed initiative for the past few years. It's an initiative that we launched to equip 500,000 people globally with the skills to either to start a business or get a job. I guess I bring a little bit more of an urban perspective coming from New York, so I'll try and add that to the discussion as well.
Great. Mark Greenlaw, responsible for sustainability and educational affairs at Cognizant, and so I have global responsibility for all our sustainability initiatives and then responsibility for all our U.S. education initiatives and including our college hiring programs. And that those two things reflect the fact that at Cognizant we believe that education is the fundamental sustainability issue of our time. And specifically in the U.S., I oversee our Making the Future program, which seeks to inspire young learners in science, technology, engineering, math, and the arts by creating fun, hands-on learning opportunities inspired by the maker movement.
I'm John Rico, CEO of Rico Enterprise in Chicago. I actually serve on a couple important committees in the state. One is the P20 Council. I co-chair the College and Career Readiness with my co-chair, just sitting right there from DeVry. And I also chair the actual Illinois Investment Workforce Board for the state of Illinois. And obviously the workforce and the P20 hand in hand is the most important thing that I see that will get our young people going.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it's a great diversity across industries, across geographies and experiences. So we're looking forward to, from the business perspective, is common to all of them, but real diversity. The title of formal title of our session is Redefining Corporate Social Responsibility. And I think that phrase, responsibility, is a heavy one. It's an important one. And I want to start the discussion by asking each of the panelists, and by the way, you feel free to pass on any of these questions if you'd like. You'll have more than enough chance. But I'd like to start with the question of responsibility and really asking, what is the role of the private sector in addressing the workforce readiness of the country? Along a spectrum of, it's the education system's responsibility, to we need to start doing this and driving it entirely ourselves, or primarily ourselves, and everything in between. And why don't I just go down, Doug, I'll start with you. What's the proper role for business?
First, I think business has been very remiss at getting involved in the educational system and the process in this country in total. And there's a host of things I think we can do. I would offer up maybe three. One is, I think we could make the case, both nationally and then also working locally, in terms of the relationship between relative to education, economic development, our ability to compete in a global economy, and ultimately our quality of life here in this nation. Because that's the aSputnik that we need to drive in this country, is the urgency around those case studies. And you've seen a lot of numbers put forth today that most people in this country do not know, number one, nor do they believe. So I think it's a role that the business can play. Secondly, I think we know, or we should know, the skill sets that are required of business for us to be able to compete in a global economy and the academic attainment of those that we hire. I think it's our responsibility to work collaboratively with the educational community to begin to define those and making sure that those are absolutely taught in the schools so the young people that come out are employable in those areas that we need so we can compete in a global economy. Thirdly, I think that all of us have employees. We need to activate our employees and get them involved. And we need to get them involved, number one, by making them aware of the problem that we have relative to our educational system. Most people do not understand that in this country. Secondly, getting them involved. And one, as a parent, understanding the role that they have as a parent in this process to change the educational system. Secondly, getting them involved and supporting them if they're on a school board or if they're working as an advisor to some program at a high school or at a university, or working in some organization nationally. We need to encourage our employees to get involved and understand this. And if we're going to turn this situation around. Those are three areas that I think businesses can make a significant impact on the educational system in the U.S.
All right, so I describe that sort of as a pretty activist role.
Yeah, I would one just caution when you said take full control. I would caution us to ever think that we're not qualified as business to do that. Number one, that's not our role. Our role is to collaborate with the educational system and make it better. And we should stick with what we do well and support in those things that others should do well.
Perfect. Okay, Mike?
I think we've heard a lot of statistics today about the problem. If you think about it, what is it? 1 in 4 kids who start 9th grade won't graduate with their class. 4 out of 10 kids who are minority groups who start 9th grade will not graduate with their class. To say that's a crisis would be an understatement. For ADM as an employer, and I think for our nation, education is a core priority for us. It's part of our strategy in terms of our foundation, in terms of giving. It's part of how we create engagement with our own employees. We found a program called Jobs for America's Graduates. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but I can tell you it's in 32 states. It has never failed in any state it's been in. Every child, it's for at-risk kids in the high school programs, and it really ties together careers and employment with education. And from my vantage point, I think this is a very complex problem. I think everyone in the room probably has a solution. I do think that we have to really take what businesses do and try to get the educational system to embrace a little bit of it. In business, when we find programs that work, we replicate those programs, and we replicate them again and again and again, because that's how we succeed in competing against our competitors. It seems that in government and in education, we find a program that works, and then we ask a question, what's the next new program? And so we fail to replicate those programs to get outcomes that we need. So I say, as an employer, our job is to help encourage those programs that succeed and support them where we can, and to recognize that if we're going to be viable as a company in the United States, we have got to have a workforce. One of the speakers spoke earlier about the need for a workforce that matters. It's not just wages. We go to locations where we can find the people to fill the jobs with the skills that we need. There needs to be a linkage between education and careers.
Layla?
Yeah, I agree with the prior two panelists. I think business has a huge role in this issue, and Nick Pinchuk earlier put it very well. We are at an economic war. We're at a war for growth and a war for talent, and it is incumbent on the private sector to participate in strengthening the health of the ecosystems in which we operate, where we hire skills and where demand comes from. I think Doug put it very well. It's not something any one sector can do in isolation. It has to be a partnership between business, government, and also the nonprofit sector. There are some really innovative nonprofits that are addressing specific skills issue, and that's certainly something that we've tried to do at Accenture. I think the other role that business can play is lending core competencies, lending a business's own core competencies to the solution for some of these problems. And, you know, I spoke about Skills to Succeed earlier, Accenture's initiative to reskill 500,000 people globally. One of the reasons we chose that as our focus is because our core business is skills. We hire 60,000 people every year. We have developed a very strong core competency at building skills, and so we felt it was an exceptional opportunity for us to give back something that we're good at to help address this issue.
Interesting. Mark?
Yeah, I think we, always are conscious about walking the fine line. We, as a corporation, we are not educational experts, but we build partnerships with really smart people like you in the room, with our nonprofit partners like National Academies Foundation, which I believe is here today, and Citizen Schools and other organizations to say, help us, advise us on what we can do to help. And essentially, we're asked to provide primarily three resources. One is financial resources to run after school programs, to help fund some of these organizations, to weigh in with our financial assets. The second is, other in-kind services that we can help, help a nonprofit build a new web application to connect parents and teachers and share data. And finally, to provide employee volunteers, and that our employees can be a tremendous asset to be out coaching and teaching. We have employees like myself who are citizen teachers volunteering in schools, with Citizen Schools in 8 states across the U.S. and other things like that. So we think that having those important mentors out in the schools and in the communities that show both college and career pathways.
John, you get the last word on this.
I concur with a lot was said. I feel that we're a coach as a private sector. We coach some of the colleges on what we need. Certifications, different industries that we specifically need as a custom. We also are, for the K-12 area, we have to be the mentors in that coaching. I remember myself when I had Oscar Mayer come to our auditorium and says, at the end, anyone who would graduate with straight A's at the last year will get a scholarship to go. Everyone, that's an inspiration. Everyone went for it. There was only two that ended up being myself and someone else at that time, and that was inspirational. And just so you know, I was born in Cabrini. So it's a long journey for individuals like myself. It's harder for low income and minority individuals out there because they don't have that additional income coming in, and the parents are always working, so it's very difficult for them to get this type of atmosphere generated in their specific neighborhoods. But there's companies like ourselves and all these companies here. I'm very proud of the large companies, the Boeings and UPS and all of them, because they were a small company at one time. Now they're a large company. They inspire me to do that. And today's society, there's more than 80% of the small businesses out there, and now they're a minority in the larger businesses. So it's up to us in the small business to carry this torch at the same time.
Very interesting. In a moment, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm actually going to throw it open to the audience if you have questions, and we'll kind of alternate between your questions and mine. Just a quick observation. I'm not an expert in this field, as my questions will make clear. But I think there's a difference in the tone of the response, a pretty similar response. What I would describe as sort of, a very, very engaged corporate responsibility is the way I would describe it. Not taking it over, doing what we do best in business, but very engaged. And I think 10 or 15 years ago, at least if I recall, in these same sort of discussions, I would often hear a thread of real frustration on the part of corporate folks with the educational system and with the educational community. That frustration may or may not be there. I'm not trying to bring that out. But I think this is coming across now as a shared problem that we all have to address. And I think that that's actually an important shift versus a decade or two ago. Just an observation as I sit and listen to these, to the responses. I'm going to ask one other question about specifically pathways. I'm going to jump around in our list of questions a bit. We've heard a lot about people, I think unnamed people, not feeling very positive about alternatives to four-year college education and the need to change that mindset. What is the mindset of you all as employers? Do you think that there is are you open to hiring people with different paths to success? Do you think your hiring people and your employees are open to it? What sort of, thinking about it from a corporate culture point of view, is the business community part of the problem in thinking too narrowly about different pathways? And maybe, does anybody want to start? And I'll give all of you a chance. Anybody, Mark and then Doug.
I think we are part of the problem, to be honest. I oversee our college recruiting programs and MBA programs, and we set a reasonably high bar. But we're trying to change that, right? And part of our belief is that we're more interested in trying to understand what young people and kids can do rather than what they know, and that's sort of epitomized by the whole do-it-yourself movement and things like, I'd rather see a young adult's digital portfolio showing what they can do, what they can make, whether it's a robot or a hydroponic system or a piece of software, rather than seeing a resume that says the classes they took. So we're trying to shift our culture to be more focused on what young people can do rather than necessarily the credentials of where they went or that they have to go to a high-end four-year school. But at the same time, we feel pressure from the community and from our competitors, to be honest, that, hey, we have to, there is a certain pressure saying that, well, are these other pathways legitimate? And it's really challenging ourselves to say, hey, what can we do in particularly certain lines of our business, like testing automation and a lot of the data center operations and breakfish, to say that there are other pathways to those jobs rather than a traditional four-year degree. So we are struggling with ourselves a little bit.
Doug, you want to answer?
I think it depends to some degree on the industry that you come from. I came from the construction industry, and obviously we hire a lot of civil engineers, mechanical, electrical engineers, but the bulk of what we do is performed by skilled trades. And Microsoft and Caterpillar and Boeing can't do what they do until somebody builds the facility that they get to do it in. And you can't have this meeting unless somebody builds this hotel here. You couldn't fly and land at the airports you came unless somebody built the runways and the terminals. So we're an industry that's a very important aspect of our economy that is basically done by people with a skill set. And we have a 2 million shortfall of skilled trades in the next 10 years in our industry. So if you come from this, I think you clearly understand the importance of the skilled trades. And we don't demean the skilled trades. They're very critical to our industry. We understand the role that they play, and that's why I've been a supporter of career and technical education. Plus, I'm a product of career and technical education. Although I've gone on, and gotten a degree and an AA and a BS and et cetera, but it all started with a career in technical education and working with these hands, and that's how I got in the workforce. So, I appreciate the skill sets that those people have. Most of them have skills that I never had, and are a lot better at building than I would ever be. My wife's a better craft worker than I am. But I have a great appreciation for what it is that they do. And somehow that has to change in this country. We have got to quit demeaning people who work with skills. It's 65% of our workforce. I know.
John, and then Mike and Layla.
Sure. I truly believe that we have to give the young people a peek into the workforce to really see what they want to see. I bet if I asked everyone here how many careers you had before you finally got the right one that you're in now, you're going to say 5 or 6 of them before. And that's me as well. I think it's important that they see what's out there and we give them a choice. And at the same time, there's many programs that we had in every state. You had CTE, you had School to Work, you had all these different programs that came out, and we all jumped on it as private sector, and we all went behind it to help it along. But sometimes what we lack is systematic. It always turns out to be a program. And a program has a beginning and end, and that doesn't work all the time. The money runs out, and all of a sudden the program's over. Now, how does that reflect on the private sector, giving it out again and again and again? So we have to learn to figure out a way of continuing these progresses for the young people without giving up. And that is called giving back.
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the last two comments. I think when you look at the high schools in America, and even in middle schools, and you think about who's giving them advice about careers, I would say, where are the employers in terms of giving them advice, and what are their involvement? I could tell you that I get an opportunity, at least I take an opportunity every chance I can, to go to high schools. And when I go there and I explain to the class, we pay a 5-year electrician $90,000 a year, and by the way, that's $30,000 more than we pay an electrical engineer. People get, wow, that's great. And I don't think that, really the career opportunities, that window that you talk about, is really open enough, early enough. And I think employers have a deeper responsibility in making sure that those wonderful career tracks that exist, kids get an opportunity to both experience and know about.
Yeah, I think Doug made a really important point, which is the openness of companies to non-traditional sort of sources of recruitment and skills depends. It varies a lot by industry. I think the most important thing is the dialogue between the private sector, between businesses, the educational institutions that are creating the skilled supply of resources. And again, nonprofits play such a crucial role in helping to find people who may have already dropped out of the educational system and getting them to the point that they are employable. And so I think that feedback and that dialogue between business, describing the skills that are necessary, and the educational system and nonprofits providing creative solutions to those skill shortages, I think that's what's really important. And I do think that businesses in the private sector is very open to that discussion.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to questions in one moment, but I just want reflecting back a little bit actually on an experience that we had. We're a small organization at the conference where we have about 400 people worldwide. But about 3 years ago, we were looking for a fairly senior person in our marketing organization, and we had winnowed down. We had a lot of applicants, not surprisingly, given the time. And we winnowed it down, and we made an offer to a woman who had a high school degree. She had never been to college, and but she had experience to the points that you all made. And this is to the point about the attitudes of our employees. And I mean, it wasn't my decision. Someone decided that she was the best candidate, and we made her an offer. And I had 2 employees come into my office sort of confidentially and complain that we had hired this person and had overlooked other people with greater academic credentials. And by the way, this person has stayed on. She's done a terrific job, not surprisingly. But we really had to have a long conversation about what was prompting these employees to actually come to the CEO and complain. I mean, it takes, that's a pretty high burden. You must think that something is really wrong to do that. And so I do think that there is a mindset issue that probably exists, as the group has been saying, among the people. And it's something to consider. Okay, let's just open it up. We have a group of folks. I'll start here, and I'll look over this way as well. If we don't have a mic, then I'll repeat the question. Well, all right, why don't you go ahead and start, and I'll repeat.
To John's point about people in this room had 5 careers before this one, I think that's probably true if you're not an educator. I think if you're in education, your tendency to have your life be that, in some ways, keeps you from understanding career pathing differently from the career path you took. And I say that as a former high school and college teacher. But my real question is, we continue to put or pit against each other academic rigor and skills development without sort of recognizing that literacy, comprehension, and computation are part of both today, because you can't do it that way. And so somehow getting back into high schools, which is a point of entry in the pathway, with people who have made it in business, so that they are sharing that. So your high school, for example, you said you go back, or your high school where I know you go back, and actually talking about success in its broad perspective rather than just calling back in the kids that went to Harvard to share that you too can go to Harvard.
Right. So
I think, but on a local level.
is important. So so the question was, how do we inject back into, particularly at the high school level, the sort of career perspectives that perhaps educators within a high school, because they haven't had those careers, maybe are themselves not able to do? How can business inject that back in? Anyone want to take that, Mike?
Well, my company has a program we call Link, and we started it several years ago. We actually hire teachers and guidance counselors over the summer to come work in our plants, in our facilities, and see the jobs. And when they go back, they don't only go back and say, oh, here's a piece of paper with a description of a job. They get to talk about those clean factories that Caterpillar and Boeing talked about. They get to go see the pride that our employees have, and they become enthusiastic supporters of the career tracks that my company has.
Any other comments on this one? That's great. All right. I'm going to look over this way. Yes, the woman and then the man right behind her. So do you have programs that will actually, and John, I'll give you first shot. Do you have programs that actually not just mentor and explain, but actually provide job opportunities?
Yes,
John.
In my company, we're an IT company, obviously. We have done that, and the sad thing about that is this: all the students that we brought on, they're still with me after 20 years. I was hoping they would move on.
Anyone else? Mark?
Yeah, we partner with one organization called Empower. I know Accenture also partners with them. It's a great organization that takes at-risk high school graduates or GEDs and puts them through a 22-week IT skills break-fix program, and then they seek to get those young people internships out into major companies like Accenture and CSC and Cognizant and JP Morgan Chase. And so that's an important thing. And then the hope is that they're getting paid for that work, a small wage. And then the hope is that they will stay on and hire them. It's a similar program that Year Up provides also, that partners with Society for Information Management. And so there are some programs. To be honest, I wish I could do more of those. The challenge is that the number of jobs that we have in that area are in the handfuls, and so the challenge is, how do you scale that program? And we need more organizations like Empower and Year Up to be doing that in all places across the country.
Okay. I'm going to take a question actually from the other room, the Regatta Bar. I think that there's some question as to whether they're actually drinking or participating. But this is a good question. It seems that if you can all hear us in the Regatta Bar, it seems like you're participating and not yet drinking. The question is, I think this is a tough one.
Yeah.
What about the C students? We need to include them. C is an acceptable achievement. People talk about the war for talent. Sort of implies that only the top of the top will get employed. Anyone want to address that?
Well, I mean, I was never an A student, and I think I did okay. We don't look at grades as a determinant of someone's future success. Whether we're recruiting on a college campus or whether we're looking at high school students and others, we looked at a whole various other sets of aptitudes. I will tell you, when we talk about career readiness, it is amazing to me in today's world how the younger people we hire today don't have a basic understanding of being to work on time, dressing a certain way, and by the way, thinking about work, in a way that I think is positive. So I say, no, we don't look at just grades. We look at lots of other things.
Doug and then Layla.
Yeah, I would same thing. In the college level, we almost hire all of the engineers through intern programs, and we start working them usually as juniors. And we do that because we're trying to learn more about them in terms of their work ethic. Do they know how to show up? Do they understand the role that they play within our business? And do they understand that that's what's required in terms of the hours it takes in terms of our business? And what we find out, you can take a C student and make him an A employee. It's very difficult sometimes to take an A student who has none of those characteristics and keep them an A. So we really try to get to understand and know the students based on who they are, not necessarily their grade point average. And being a C student, it worked for me. So, I've got a lot of latitude with the young people in that respect. I don't think everybody, there's a lot of educated idiots in the world, and we need to understand that. We need to find people who can work.
Layla, you get the last word.
On that note. No, I was just going to add, there's such a diversity of jobs available in the private sector. There is room for both. There is room for A students. Certainly in professional services, grades matter and undergraduate degrees matter, and often advanced education matters. But even in those companies, there's room for the folks who go through the NPower program, which is such a great example, to find those people who have attributes that are more job relevant than their grades. So I think it's an and, not an either or discussion.
All right, I'm going to ask one question, and then I'll come back to the audience. We've talked about Sputnik, and actually Doug, and we had a conference call last week to talk about this, and Doug raised the Sputnik issue, and I think it's been mentioned at least 3 times this morning, and it's not even lunchtime. So I'm sure that the people in this room believe that we need a Sputnik moment. So my question, I think, is a tougher one. How do we create one? And I'm not sure if someone wants to go first on this one. How do we create that Sputnik moment, given the fact that polling data shows, right, that Americans not only think highly of their local school systems, but think more and more highly of them as time goes on. So the definition of the need for a Sputnik moment may be limited to not just the people in this room, but a relatively small segment of the population. Anyone want to take that, Doug?
Since I brought it up in our teleconference, I'm not sure if I know how to do that, but if you think about those of us who were here when Sputnik went up, I believe it was 1957, it basically created a fear. So there was a sense of urgency driven around a fear that our life may change in this country, or that we could actually be overtaken by another country who happened to put that Sputnik up. So fear drove that. And then what we saw is every day on the news, discussions around this space war and the commitment the United States had toward it. And it drove what ultimately led to Neil Armstrong on Apollo 11 landing on the moon. We need to create that same sense of urgency. And I would suggest to you that basically what's going on in our education system, or what's not going on in our education system, is as dangerous, if not more so, to the future of this country than Sputnik ever was. Okay? When you're 18th in the nation out of 24 industrial nations in the world, out of 24 industrial nations in terms of your graduation rate, and we lose 1 million to 1.2 million kids who can't get out of high school, the ability for us to be the greatest nation on earth, and I would suggest to you that maybe we're not, is diminishing at a tremendous rate. And if we can't get people to understand that, so you can drive that sense of urgency and where our place, our quality of life for our kids and grandkids will ultimately end up being, if we cannot change that. If you can't drive the sense of urgency and the dissatisfaction in this country with that statement, then we have a serious problem, much greater than the problem we're talking about. And somehow we have to elevate this discussion to the level that it creates dissatisfaction in this country more than we've ever had, that is when you will change it. This is America, and America is incredible at coming to the table when there is a sense of urgency that we have to rally around something. And we've seen it in a host of ways. We have to create that rallying point around education.
I think I'm just going to go down the row here, Mike.
Yeah, sure. Creating that Sputnik's kind of interesting. I was born in 1957, so I only remember it a little bit. But, I do think that, I'm a big believer in our country, and I think that this problem is becoming more and more front issue. Governor Markell out of Delaware, who's now the chair of the National Governors Association, gets to pick one issue in his 1 year in term. His one issue, education. There are 17,000 school boards across America today. 12 governors just in the last 2 months in their State of the Union speeches talked about education as their top priority and talked about the JAG program that I mentioned earlier as something they want to extend throughout their state. I can tell you this, I get to travel all over the world. I've been the head of HR for Citibank and Citigroup prior to this. I've visited almost 150 countries. And I can tell you that when I go visit a country, I look at its educational system and I say, how successful are they going to be? I can assure you that while we have a third of our kids not finishing high school, do you think that that's happening in China? Because I can tell you it's not. And I think the crisis is upon us, and I think business is about to, is pushing its interests because we need to have a workforce we can employ, and I think government is going to come right behind it. And all of you, I think this is a testimony by itself. Look at the number of people filling this room and the bar, and because you all care, because you care about the issue, and I think that's what creates a Sputnik.
Yeah, my comments are very similar. I think we do, in a way, have a Sputnik moment in terms of the magnitude of the crisis. And the data may tell us different things on how well recognized that is, but certainly I think it was Andy who earlier was sharing, 55% youth unemployment in Spain and 25% in France, and in our own country, stagnating wage growth and stagnating job growth. I think that does make for a Sputnik moment. Maybe the call to action is something that we need to get a little bit more cohesive about, but surely we have a crisis of that magnitude. So I think one of the big opportunities for us in this conference is a great example of doing that, is to come together on the issue and collaborate on the issue, not only within the various sectors, within the private sector and the public sector, but among the various sectors to try and address this issue.
Yeah, and I'll direct my response to the other corporations in the room. Who works for a business here in the room? Just raise your hand. So we get at least a survey a week, if not more, from all our customers saying, what are you doing about climate change? What are you doing about human rights violations? What are you doing about safety and injury rates in your company? No one ever asks us, what are you doing about education, right? And so I would like to see the same kind of disclosure and high standards that we hold around sustainability, carbon emission, human rights, labor practices, to have that same commitment to education and create that same sort of wave where customers are asking their suppliers and their suppliers are asking their suppliers, and we ripple education commitment through the supply chain the same way that we're rippling sustainability through the supply chain.
Very interesting. John, do you want to?
Yeah,
Sense
just
of urgency?
brief on it. Because small business is directly involved with the education, that's where our pull comes from. The small business is competing in the global market just like the large ones, okay? But I think it's harder for the small business because of their funding, what they have, and the years behind it. So the important thing about education and that is the entrepreneurship that has to happen. That's the only way we're going to grow more businesses out of it. I'll give you an example. In Northwestern, there's the oldest incubator is called The Incubator, and it's over 26 years old. And I was pretty much involved with it when it first started. And there was one company in there, and they're all cubby holes. There's 50 cubby holes there. One company that did not want to leave after 2 years after growing it. And the name of that company was Peapod. It's a global company. And we had to actually evict them out of there so we could get more room for bring somebody else in. But the point is that we are, in America, we are smart. We capable of doing all these things if we all put our heads together to make it happen.
We have time for either half a question or half an answer. So I'm just going to jump ahead. The gentleman there is, but please make it crisp, and we'll have some short answers too.
So I'm Derek Williams, and I'm here representing Radio and Awesome Adoption.
Very interesting question. For the other room, I'll repeat for those of you who didn't hear. So, cultural norms change, the way people dress and the way people exhibit themselves, and also they come from different cultures. How do businesses include these folks? Again, if there's a talent shortage, we need to look to everybody. How do businesses deal with that? And that's it's not an easy question to ask. Anyone have experiences with it, or? John, do you want to start?
I have a lot of IT techs that we service Chicago Public Schools, for example, and a lot of the criteria is they can't come in with tattoos. They can't come in with shorts. They can't come with tank tops. They have to be in a professional way. So that question, it hits home very well. Obviously, they have to camouflage it for one, but they can't expose it. So some of my guys will roll up their sleeves and start working on it, and a bunch of tattoos there. You're exposing that to young children. And you, as adult, is giving them ideas. Is that the right singles to do? No, it's not. But on the other hand, for them to be techs themselves and see what they're doing and how they're fixing the computer, for example, is the right thing to do. So you have to balance that as your own company in the policies that we all make in our own company.
Yep. Mike?
Yeah, well, I mean, with regard to tattoos, you're welcome in any of my plants anywhere. It's okay. Many of us have tattoos too. It's not just the younger generation.
I want to say I've moderated a lot of panels. This is the first time that a panelist has ever admitted to that, so I think we should. So please join me in giving Mike and his colleagues on the panel a hand for that. Thank you very much.